There you go.
Now we're gonna get it. Can you hear me all right? It was after midnight. It was a beautiful night, spring, 1961. 2 weeks, high school graduation. Oh, I could feel the garment of freedom beginning to fit upon me. And the night was just bathed with the fragrances of spring. As I indicated, it was after midnight. I pulled out of Jefferson heading back home, Old Highway 30. I had received the family car as a graduation gift. And for all you gearheads out there, you may recall that back in 1954 and 1955, Ford moved away from the flathead into an OHC. And you had a little more horsepower, a little more speed. Well, let's just see how fast this thing goes. Here's a 1955 Ford. East of Jefferson, about 3 miles, is a little short valley, the Hardin Creek Valley. You drop down off the flat down into that little valley. Hat Springer lived on the south side, right around the hill. I remember going by there at 115. Down through the flat, up into the bridge at 120. It's got to be the fastest car in the valley. I went home, back bed, get up the next morning, back to school. 2 more weeks left. That afternoon, my friend and I, we had to go back to Jefferson for some silly little thing. Pulled out of Grand Junction, got back on the Old Highway 30, made it a half a block, and I blew a right front tire out. Now keep in mind at 120 miles an hour, your body is moving at 176 feet a second. The power of not having power steering, of course, it booted me over to the side, booted me over on the shoulder. And as I was changing the tire, and I thought, if this would have happened 17 hours earlier, Jody would attest as a highway patrolman, having covered accidents where people have run into immovable objects. And I thank God for his benevolence to me and for his providence that that old tire held on for another 17 hours. But that's what we want to do today. We're going to talk about the providence of God. And in doing so, we will be led back into the book of Esther. The book of Esther never mentions the Lord. Never does. But the circumstances of that story has got his fingerprints all over the story. You may recall a number of years ago, there was a speaker on the radio, a lovely guy, I'm sure a lot of you folks did too. His name is Paul Harvey. And Brother Paul had his radio show called The Rest of the Story. And as I began to research the book of Esther, I found some interesting things woven into that story that the scriptures don't give us. In chapter 1, verse 1, it says, "Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus," this is Ahasuerus, which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. Well, that sounds like a pretty good sized place. We think of Iowa, you got 99 counties here. There's probably something similar to what we have, you know. Not hardly. When our son lived in Texas, he used to tell me, when they lived in Dalhart, he said, "You know, Dad, Perry is closer to Dalhart than Houston, Texas is." He had one particular drop in his truck route from where they're in Amarillo to El Paso. It was 635 miles. That's a big territory. Now, you all know, and I do too, down there, they don't consider Texas a state, it's a country. They're different from everybody else. Well, to give you an idea as to this kingdom, it was 4 times the size of the state of Texas. 2.1 million square miles. That's a lot of land. A lot of land. We see there King Ahasuerus appearing. And as we enter into the story, we see that he is called for a banquet. This is not your average banquet. That banquet lasts 6 months. Well, that must have been a very special event, going for 6 months. Well, the mission of that wasn't necessarily all fun, because you see, several years previous, they had been in a battle with Greece, and they got beat. So now we're going to rally the troops, all the troops. Now, some of you might have been in marketing and all remember sales meetings. Oh, you go to the sales meeting and the boss gets up there and you get a rah-rah system on. Boy, we're going to get them now, and watch what we're going to do, and all this stuff. There were untold millions of dollars that were spent on that 6-month period, preparing for that battle. And the last part of the battle was the king said, "Oh, here, let's bring the local folk in. We'll bring all the Shushan," which was the town they were in. "Let's bring the local folks in here. Look at our splendor and our glory, all of my splendor and all of my glory." And of course, he approached the troops, hundreds of them, generals, lieutenants, captains, preparing for battle. You have to go with me because some of this was really funny. So, so he finally says, you know, boys, you ought to see my wife. Why, she's the most beautiful woman in the whole kingdom here. And so he calls one of his men from his chamberlain. He says, you want to go over there and bring Vashti over here. I want the boys to see her. Well, that doesn't sound too bad. Oh, by the way, have her wear her crown. Because you see, there are several Jewish historians and scholars that say she was pure naked in all her glory. She said, no. Good for her. She wasn't going to go parading in there amongst this drunken bunch. And of course, we read the text there, and oh my, now there's a big to-do. We sure can't have that. Well, you got to go with me. This was kind of fun to write when you read some of the things these people did. Queen Vashti refused to come into the king's commandment. The king was very wroth, and his anger burned in him. Well, he just got through telling the troops how pretty that she was, and he is the king, and I mean, the king always gets in his way, and somebody steps up and says, not this time. So the guy is very upset. Chamberlain comes back, says she won't come. Oh my, now what are we going to do? The situation called for a crisis meeting in the cabinet. And then they thought, well, you know, if we don't do something here, all the wives of the other men in the whole of the region are going to realize, well, if the queen can say no, I can too. Got to do something here. Great problems. And of course, you may recall within the story, she was banished. She was kicked out of the court and sent back to the other, I'll use the word dormitory because that's what it was, with the other concubines. Well, all right, we progress. The battle's on. So they head down there. There are some calculations, 250 to 300,000 troops were involved in going down to fight against Greece. And in the process of that, their strategist decided, you know, we need a land bridge built here. And we need to get thousands of slaves, and we need to build a land bridge from our point of demarcation over here to where we'll be able to go after the Greeks. So they went in there and they built this land bridge. Now we're going to take care of it. Well, just right before the battle, a huge storm came up and it washed away that land bridge. Of course, that didn't make him real happy. It destroyed the bridge there at Thermopylae. And of course, we have to keep in mind too, there were two issues that took place here. The ratio was 10 to 1. For every 10 Persians, there was 1 Greece. The difference being the Greeks were highly trained. There was a movie called The 300. I don't know if any of you saw that, but that had to do with that battle. They were highly skilled warriors. The Persians were not. And of course, in the process of it, there were tens of thousands of Persians that were defeated. The campaign was lost. Oh, what are we going to do now? Well, the king had an answer. And just go with me on this a little bit. So, the king is in defeat. There's a reason for that. So he gets out on the phone, hypothetically. He says, General, yeah, this is the king. Well, she's all right. She's not here anymore. I say, listen, about your battle down there, we took a terrible beating. We don't believe that the engineers made that land bridge. Bring them up here. We're going to kill them all. And they did. They beheaded all of them. So now, General, this is what I want you to do. I want you to get down there. There's the waves were the problem. I want you to get down there and take your belt there off your swords. And those waves need 300 smacks. You're to spank those waves. And then when you get done, I want you to take your swords, build fires, put the swords in there till your tips are red hot, and then your job is to go back in there and stab those waves. We need to establish who's in charge here. Okay. Yes, sir. The general, Lieutenant Frank, say, listen, I got a request for you guys down there. Yeah, I know, we took terrible beatings. The king wants you to go down and you're to take your belts off and to give the waves a 300 lash beating. Take your swords and then you're supposed to stab the waves. Hello? Can you imagine? Keep in mind now, Ahasuerus is in charge. That's what the king is like. Very, very different. Can't imagine the background laughing and yucking it up. Okay, so he comes home from the battle. He's walking around the palace. He's disturbed and just no woman around here. And it says that he missed her. He misses Vashti. Some of you guys that are married, your wife may have gone on the weekend to a women's retreat or gone to her relative's house, and in your heart of hearts you miss her. Glad she comes home and picks up after you then. Not in our house, no. So the Chamberlain gets together and says, we got to do something here. He's just not real happy. Let's have a beauty pageant. So they presented the idea to him. The servants rescued the king. And out of that whole area, they finally narrowed it down to 400 contestants. And they had their beauty pageant. Now, at this point, it's important for us to bring in the next character in this story, and that's Mordecai. Now, Mordecai was one of them that was carried off to Babylon in the 70-year period. Cyrus sent the Jewish people supposedly back to their land. There's a lot of them didn't go back. Mordecai was one of them. He stayed there in Persia with thousands of other Jews. Well, 70 years. You're going to have started additional families, maybe grandchildren, relatives, businesses, properties. You developed your own civilization right there, your own culture. But the interesting thing about Mordecai, he had a political job in the palace. He was there at the right place at the right time. And we see here, again, the Lord's hand moving in these scenarios. Now, Esther was his cousin. She had no mom or dad. It's interesting, if you look there in chapter 2, verses 7, it says that she was beautiful and shapely. So, guys, that's eye candy, isn't it? That's what we refer to. She was naturally charming. A guy who headed up the contest over here, he liked her. She was charming and beautiful. He gave her all the things that she needed to be successful. One thing she didn't do was to say that she was Jewish. Mordecai charged her with that. Do not reveal your nationality. Well, for prep, 6 months. 6 months in oil of myrrh bathing, 6 months of bathing in sweet perfumes, a year in preparation. I found out in America, I think it was 2024, $64 billion was spent by the ladies on perfume, makeup, hair care, toes, fingernails. That's an awful lot of money. So gentlemen that are married, you know how at times we getting ready to go somewhere and our wife is still doing something. We kind of look at our watch and we think, we've been there for a little bit. Imagine waiting for a year before the right woman comes along. Anyway, she was a natural beauty. She ends up being taken into the king in the process of finding the queen. And of course, he loved her, and the crown was hers. At this point in the story, of course, we read that Mordecai, sitting in the king's gate, he was a judge, apparently. Right place at the right time. And he overhears a conspiracy to kill the king. Two guys, Big Than and Teresh. Big Than. Teresh. They're going to kill the king. Well, of course, he reports it. They, in turn, take them. They say they hang them on a tree. You know, the scriptures are very soft from time to time. Folks, they didn't hang them on a tree. They impaled them on the tree, like a marshmallow. Their laws were pretty strict. Now, you may recall a number of years ago, there was a Western movie that came out and had Clint Eastwood in it. It's called Good, the Bad, the Ugly. Now we're going to look at the really ugly. Enter Haman. Apparently, somewhere in the mechanism of politics, he is promoted to a chief seat. And with that, of course, was to come all of the accolades that would go along with being a special person in the king's inner circle. All the king's servants that were in the king's gate, they bowed and revered Haman, for the king had so commanded them. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did he reverence him. Now, we see gestures once in a while on TV when the political people are meeting once in a while, they come together. No, that's not what this means. It means get on all fours. If Haman comes walking by, get on your hands and knees, just like a dog. But Haman bowed not. He remembered Deuteronomy. It said there, God declares, you don't bow before anybody but me. God's law was very explicit. Mordecai at that point did reveal to the other people there in the court at the gate, yes, he was Jewish. In that revelation comes Haman's hatred and plan to destroy all the Jews. This is not a new plan, folks. Genesis 3:14, Lord declares, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. And all you have to do is look through history. And even today, all you have to do is pick up the newspaper and see that whole line is still functioning today. If you were to take a map, it's amazing to me, take a map and look at how tiny Israel is and how huge Iraq, huge Iran, all of these huge countries around there. And here is this little slip of land. And I believe it's in Isaiah, God says, I'll make Israel a bone in the throat of the nation. That's just what we see today, isn't it? So the bad guy steps up. He comes up with a plan to destroy all the Jews. But there must be a reason for that. Well, the king's treasury had been stripped supporting this last debacle. As I said, there were untold millions of dollars that were spent on that campaign. Not just the 6-month party, but the campaign itself. Sniffing money, the king agrees to the plan. Typical politician. Authority is given to Haman with no regard to human life. There was one approximation made that there were actually close to 2 million people that died in that conflict. The order goes out. Kill them all. Men, women, children. There also was an estimate there were approximately 25 million Jews living in that vast land of Persia. Of course, the order goes out. It's posted. They've got riders running all over the countryside. They've given a date. This is the day when you are to wipe them off the face of the earth. Mordecai, of course, was very aware of it, one of the first ones. And he goes back to the gate with a very bitter cry. And it says that in every province there was weeping, wailing, sackcloth, and ashes. Esther, being in the king's presence, knows you can't go in the king's gate of the court without being clean. We can't have any of this ashes and remnant as what you have on, ashes, dirt. He received it not. Lori and I were in the Holocaust Museum in every year in Washington, D.C. And we had just a glimpse of the emotional power being put into a railroad car. And they had one there, just like what they transported the Jews to the ovens in. And I'm confident to say that the people that were put in there experienced their understanding of where they were going. And for just a little bit, we felt the hopelessness of that, the power of the big government. Nobody's going to walk out of this. And I'm sure that there were many Jews that felt the same way. Well, her cousin, Mordecai, has contact with her. He requests that she go into the king, ask for supplication for the Jewish people. The centerpiece of this little book is found here in these next verses. Then Mordecai commanded Esther, and he said, "Think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holds your peace at this time, then there shall be an enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. Who knows whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" She receives permission to go before the king. The book of she receives permission to go before the king. She comes up with a plot. Clever, I thought. She's aware of what Haman had done. So she proposes a banquet. We seem to have a lot of banquets in there, don't we? Well, that night there is no sleep for the king. The book of Chronicles is opened, and Abe brings him the book. Can't sleep, wants something to read. And in the reading of that, he finds that Mordecai was the one who saved his life. He's the one that blew the lid off of this assassination plot. And he asks, what honor was given to that man? After all, he saved the king's life. And then he receives a recommendation of what to give Mordecai. The royal horse, the royal robe. Haman, you're to take the bridle and walk him around the town and declare how the king had shown great favor to Mordecai. Well, Haman is humiliated. The king said, "Make haste, take the robe or apparel of honor, the royal horse, give them to Mordecai, lead him around town." The plans of God are now being revealed. They are overruling the plans of man. Well, the banquet takes place, and the petition from Esther goes before the king. Haman is hastened. One of the chamberlains goes to his home and says, come on. You've got this banquet. You need to get in there right now. I love this. She goes before the king and she says, let my life be given me, and my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to utterly perish. Talk about table talk. I bet things got real quiet then, don't you think? The king was upset, obviously. And Esther said, at his request, at the king's request, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. The scripture says he was so mad he had to leave the room. He was furious. He needed time to collect his thoughts. And upon returning, Haman had fallen partially on her lounge. Pretty awkward, isn't it? The consequences of choice reveal themselves. Well, of course, it only took about 2.1 seconds. The guards were standing there to see what had happened and what was processing. They said they covered Haman's face and took him right out, hung him on the gallows. And as we talked about, a little more just hanging him on there. The progression of events, we have seen Mordecai with the king's blessing and great promotion, and a new law that they wrote that allowed the Jews to defend themselves. Now get the horses together. We got to get this out. We cannot remove the old law of meats and virgins, but we can institute a new one. The Jews have a right to defend themselves. Send them off to every province. And then we see how God continues to move in the hearts of people. Esther chapter 9, it says, and all the rulers of the provinces, and the lieutenants, and the deputies, and the officers of the king helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Ahasuerus, and he was great among the Jews, and accepted of all the multitude of his brethren. And he was seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking peace to all of his seed. Right man at the right place. God's providence is not only seen in Ahasuerus' kingdom, but it's seeing a 17-year-old kid soon graduate, changing a tire on an old car. So grateful it didn't happen 17 hours earlier while driving the fastest car in the valley. You know, Job Revelation, we're going to close with this. When we get to heaven and we see the providence of God in all of these different areas of your life and mine, do you realize how easy it's going to be to take your crown off and put it right at the feet of the Lord who enabled you to experience what you did? when we get to that point, it's going to be real easy. I have a song I'd like you folks to enjoy, a little piece of music. It's going to escort us not just into the presence of God, but in a sense, it's waiting for us there. It's a video. Please enjoy.